Hello, my name is Afkera Daniel, and I am a fourth-year medical student at Johns Hopkins who has been working with UCSF and the Kenya Medical Research Institute as a Doris Duke International Clinical Research Fellow. I'm glad to be speaking with you today about our work in the Shamba Maisha RCT conducted in Western Kenya, and more specifically about our qualitative sub-study on land tenure, empowerment, and health outcomes among communities in the Shamba Maisha intervention. To give a brief overview of what I'll be speaking about today, I'll start with an introduction focused on the relationship between land tenure, food insecurity, and HIV health, then provide some background on the Shamba Maisha parent study before going into more detail on our land tenure study. Land tenure is an important structural factor linked to food insecurity and HIV risk and vulnerability, particularly among populations that are dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. Now, before diving into this relationship, it's important to try to define what land tenure is in the first place. This is not perfectly straightforward. How land tenure is understood varies across regions and cultures, and even within land tenure research and literature. It can be thought of as the common law systems by which land is owned, and even more generally, any kind of hold an individual has on their land, including rented or leased land, family-owned or ancestral land, and informally held or borrowed land. In this qualitative sub-study, we have defined land tenure as an individual's perceived sense of reliable access to and decision-making power over their land holdings. Because farmers who feel more secure about their access to land are more likely to invest in this land, as well as in labor and agricultural inputs, they are also more likely to have higher agricultural productivity, food availability, and food security, compared to farmers who feel land insecure. Weak land tenure security has also been demonstrated to negatively impact HIV prevention due to associated loss of income, loss of livelihood and shelter, and forced migration. All of these effects of land tenure security are compounded for women, who are especially land insecure and whose lack of property ownership has been linked to the probability of experiencing physical and sexual violence, which are in turn linked to increased HIV risk. Our study sought to better understand the relationship between land tenure and Shamba Maisha, an agricultural livelihood intervention aimed at improving HIV health outcomes. Key study questions for us included, does land tenure affect how participants benefit from this kind of intervention? And how do land access and property rights impact women's empowerment in this context? In examining these relationships, we sought to address a gap in research on how land tenure security impacts structural livelihood interventions. In terms of methods, we conducted 30 in-depth interviews with purposefully sampled participants in the intervention arm that received the intervention 3 to 6 months prior to the interview, and who had a variety of answers to survey questions regarding income and property ownership. Before diving deeper into our current study, let's talk a little bit more about the Shamba Maisha parent study. Shamba Maisha, which translates to farm life in Kiswahili, is the first cluster RCT that, through a novel multi-sectoral agricultural and financial intervention, seeks to evaluate whether improving food insecurity and household economic indicators can lead to direct health benefits for people living with HIV. Conducted in 3 counties in Western Kenya, Shamba Maisha provided study participants with a 3-pronged intervention comprised of agricultural implements, a microfinance loan, and education in financial management and sustainable farming practices. Our intervention group was tracked against our control group for a 2-year period to compare health outcomes, food security indicators, and household income indicators. Land tenure is a key component of the Shamba Maisha intervention, which, as an agricultural intervention, required that participants have access to land in order to be enrolled. However, we began to see that some participants, particularly women, struggled to maintain the ability to cultivate on the land with which they had enrolled in the study. In addition to this, and as mentioned earlier on in this talk, land tenure is closely linked to HIV health and food insecurity, both of which are important components of the Shamba Maisha study. There were 4 key themes that emerged from our in-depth interviews on land tenure, which you can see listed on this slide. Over the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit more about each of these themes and then synthesize our findings and recommendations for next steps. Theme 1 pertains to the improved mental and physical health and increased sense of empowerment described by participants due to increased income and enhanced farming and cultivation practices since joining Shamba Maisha. Participants described improvements in individual and family health, in CD4 cell counts and weight gain, as well as decreased feelings of stress and worry. In addition to this, they reported an increase in self-confidence and other empowerment indicators, including life hopes and dreams and the ability to speak up in a group. One woman noted that she could see her family's bodies becoming healthier, adding that the body rashes and skin infections they used to get vanished since she joined Shamba Maisha. Another participant poignantly noted that Shamba Maisha has earned me some respect. My opinions and suggestions can now be heard because I am self-reliant. Our second theme focuses specifically on the impact of land tenure on farming practices and investment decisions, both of which we found to be heavily dependent on land tenure and the strength of a participant's claim over their land. We found that participants who described themselves as insecure about their land access actively decided to decrease investments made in farming and land cultivation for Shamba Maisha. One participant who was uncertain about the strength of his land tenure noted that worries about land affect Shamba Maisha because when you start worrying, you don't feel encouraged. Hence, you are not able to proceed with work properly, but just do very little. This discrepancy was apparent through decisions made with regard to short-term and longer-term investments, including crop selection, equipment purchases, and construction. We found in our third theme that, interestingly, perceived land tenure security varied among participants and wasn't strictly tied to some of the things that we might commonly assume make a person feel more secure about their land holdings, such as a title deed. Some of the key factors that influenced a sense of security over land did include documentation, but also included factors like community support or validation and an individual's previous experiences with property disputes. One participant noted that while an agreement regarding his land was documented, his sense of land security was also rooted in the fact that this documentation took place in the presence of the chief as a witness, to whom he could return for additional requests or support. Our fourth theme highlights the fact that land tenure security posed unique challenges for women in Shamba Maisha, with important implications for their continued participation and success in the intervention. Due to low household decision-making power, reliance on husbands or male partners for permission to access land, ownership and inheritance disputes in the event of a husband's death, and low rates of documentation that supported property ownership, women were more likely than men in our study to report feeling land insecure and to experience land disputes with less recourse for resolution. One participant noted that she worried her husband might have different plans for the piece of land she was using for Shamba Maisha, and that a time might be coming when she won't be able to cultivate it anymore. Another participant reflected on the experience of a fellow Shamba Maisha participant whose husband died and whose Shamba Maisha farm was subsequently raided by thieves. She noted, "The women who lived there almost gave up, and I told them that's how it is. You are widows, and so no one can take the mandate to guard your farms." In terms of implications and next steps, targeted livelihood interventions like Shamba Maisha have great potential for improving health among vulnerable populations. However, it is important that future interventions consider ways to promote land tenure security, especially for women. In our study, we found that a sense of feeling secure about access to land allowed individuals to more successfully participate in Shamba Maisha, which provided them and their families with a source of practical skills education and readily available income, leading to perceived improvements in mental and physical health and empowerment. Moving forward, additional studies should aim to use more quantitative measurements of perceived and actual land tenure security and to incorporate these findings into future iterations and scale up of programs similar to Shamba Maisha. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about our work today. I want to give a special thanks to the entire Shamba Maisha team and all of our partners and to the ANH Academy. It's been great speaking with you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual conference. Take care.